Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you to the Polonium Foundation for allowing me to talk about my work. Today I will tell you a little bit about my work on how we pay attention in everyday environments and how we can use electroencephalography for this purpose combined with multivariate analysis. Right, so what interests me personally in my work is how we process information in the real world environments. And what that means at the very foundation is basically how we recognize objects, despite all of the distraction, despite all of the noise that surrounds it typically. So by objects, we mean external objects, people, but also alphanumeric symbols. And in the case where understanding and recognizing alphanumeric symbols matters the most, the classroom, let me give you an example. So the state of art for understanding attentional processes in the classroom are the following. For example, it's the first day in school and Mrs. Perronnet is teaching the kids the alphabet, and she's saying this shape A goes with the sound A. And here we have our little Johann, and he's writing down very fast the repetitions of the A. He has no problem. He's doing the same thing for B and C. He's great. And the teacher is thinking, okay, probably he has a very good working memory. He's memorizing things very well, how things go together. Then we have our little Pierre-François. And for him, it's a little bit too much, too quickly. He's kind of doing it right, drawing the letters, but not when he's supposed to. He's missing it. And so by being distracted, by failure, frustrated, he's starting to distract little Mary. And little Mary, she's doing quite well. She's also listening to the teacher, to Miss Perronnet, and she's drawing the letters as she goes together with the sound. She's doing quite well, but perhaps not as well as little Johann. And the teacher is thinking, maybe her skills in paying attention to visual spatial relationships are not very good. Okay, but at least there are no big problems with her. Right, so in my opinion, and in order to understand innovation processing in the real world, we need to study the brain and cognitive mechanisms. And the way we should study it is in environments that behave like the real world. So these environments are multisensory. What does that mean? That their information typically stimulates multiple senses. And here, for example, Mary sees and hears what she's supposed to be learning. And she's writing the information. But those environments are also full of noise. And so our distracted Pierre-François is also trying to distract Mary. And finally, what we must do frequently changes in goals and difficulty. And our Johann has shown that one can be very good in changing your attention in line with the instruction. So together with my collaborators for the past 12 or 13 years, we've been trying to identify how attention interacts with our ability to integrate information across the senses and developing models of those interactions. We've also been using EEG, electroencephalography, as a diagnostic tool, how to tell apart different perceptual and different attentional processes in health and in disease, but also people from different groups. And finally, combine this knowledge to help us rehabilitate different pediatric disorders, from children born prematurely to kids with lazy eye, with amblyopia, to kids with cerebral palsy, using also the advances in technology such as VR. And so in understanding how learning and attention occurs in the classroom, there are some very big outstanding questions still. So it is entirely unclear to us whether our ability to pay attention to visual objects, something that has been studied over and over for the past decades in relationship to education, are those skills in fact developing at the same time, before or perhaps after the abilities to pay attention preferentially to multisensory objects across primary school. So as I said, linking the drawn shape and the sounds, this is very important for those basic educational skills. What is also important is to what extent those attentional skills are actually supported by the brain in a similar fashion, and across what ages and this is happening. And this is important for us to be able to hone in on processes, on those target processes. If someone is not using the right brain networks, then perhaps using, we can develop interventions that are making, well, they're encouraging the brain to be processing information one specific way versus an abnormal one. And finally, whether any of those attentional processes at the level of behavior or the level of brain can act as biomarkers, whether they are predictive of successful learning of those basic educational skills, such as reading or basic math and so on later on. And so how do we do those tests? So typically we use cognitive tasks embedded in a sort of a game. And here, for example, we can ask our participants to help Captain Blackbeard to find real, here, blue diamonds among all the fake ones. And this is a study that we did with my PhD student, Nora Turoman. And so we would present to participants a lot of trials, which are basically just sequences of events. And so you have this search array with a blue diamond. That's what participants are supposed to be looking for. And once they find it, they need to say whether this diamond is vertical or horizontal. But also before them, they have those flashes of color. And those flashes of color can either match the color of the target, such as here, or have a different target, a second target, a different color, non-target color. And through this, we can measure the strength of one's attention to visual objects driven by feature, here, color. Also on other trials, we would present sounds together with those flashes of color. And through this, we would be able to also measure the sensitivity of attention to audiovisual stimuli, so-called multisensory attention. And so we would be asking our participants to press buttons, and we would derive behavioral measures of attention, both of visual and multisensory attention. And we would see to what extent adults and kids across primary school share abilities to control their attention towards visual and multisensory information. So we tested young adults, 9-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and 5-year-olds. And as these studies were done in Switzerland, 5-year-olds are basically kids who have just entered formal schooling. Right, so in visual attention, we found in young adults, this is great, we found this before. We also found this visual attentional markers in 9-year-olds. This is interesting because there's quite a chunk of time between the two age groups, and yet already 9-year-olds share similar behavioral attentional skills. We also found it in 7-year-olds. So this means that this ability to control attention by color seems to be a very fundamental, semi-early developed skill that does not exist unless you go to school. So it doesn't exist at school entry just yet. What about multisensory attention? So in young adults, we found it. This is great. We have seen this before, so this is a nice replication of our own previous work. What about 9-year-olds? It seems that 9-year-olds were not sensitive to the multisensory stimuli like adults, neither 7-year-olds nor 5-year-olds. But we also recorded EEG, of course. And why should you care about some electrodes on the head? Well, EEG is relatively cheap to buy and run as a measure of brain activity. It's easy to use, so students can be easily trained to record and analyze the data. It's accessible, so we can use it on neonates, elderly, people with different disorders such as schizophrenia, autism, even coma, but also such conditions like claustrophobia, people with implants, and pacemakers. And finally, it's information rich, so EEG can record a brain activity at sub-millisecond scale. I can do so across multiple channels on the head at the same time, and can be combined with other methods, other neuroimaging methods, also pharmacological methods and stimulatory methods. It is portable, so it's lightweight. It's these days often also wireless and can record, and so can be used also in actual vertical classrooms. And finally, it's independent of overt behavioral responses, with markers of perception, cognitive, and motor processes actually available from the EEG. And so all of those are actually making EEG very good method to study cognitive processes in the kids. Right. So in terms of markers of attention EEG, there's certainly one. So if I presented this this screen to you, and I told you to pay attention to this white rectangle, then on the side opposite of the head to the side of the rectangle, you would have this more negative activity, more negative than the activity on the same side of your head, that we call N2PC. And this is all nice and great, and it's been found many times to be present when we are paying attention, also measured behaviorally. But what, as you can see, is that most of the EEG is actually not analyzed in this case. So we decided to also be analyzing those type of responses with global multivariate EEG analysis. Some specific, in particular, electroneuroimaging analysis have been developed here in Switzerland and been refined ever since, which take the information across the whole scalp. And what it does at the very foundation, but we can go into details a little bit more, no time to explain this just now, is it analyzes the relationships between the hills and the valleys in the voltage of the electrical field at the scalp. And so it really, it's sensitive to patterns, and it can analyze those and compare them statistically. Okay. So we analyzed both N2PC and the electroneuroimaging of this N2PC in our 4 groups of age participants in this particular study. And what did you find? I'm just presenting to you one type of condition. So this was this blue distractor for blue target, as we've known this the best. And we measured whether there was N2PC at all, whether it was sensitive to, whether it was stronger for the blue versus red distractors, and whether there was also modulation for audiovisual nature of the distractor. So whether it was different for the visual versus audiovisual trials. And so N2PC was there. We will see why that's important. It was also modulated by visual attention, and we've known this from other work, so that's great. And here's the first surprise. It was actually not sensitive to audiovisual attention. In kids, actually, there was not even, in 9-year-olds, there was no N2PC, no visual modulations or audiovisual modulations, and the same story for 7-year-olds and 5-year-olds. So it seems that our biomarker is not really a biomarker when we're taking it outside of typical adult participants processing visual information. So with electroneuroimaging, which basically here that's clustering on the EEG data, and we constrain it to this N2PC time window that is marked here in both pink and gray, we found 4 different stable patterns of EEG activity that explains the EEG signal N2PC. And now we have found N2PC-like responses. We also found modulations in adults, also visual attention, and also audiovisual attention. So that was processing. Then we went into 9-year-olds, and we found that they had N2PC now. They did not show visual modulations, but they definitely found audiovisual modulations. In 7-year-olds, we found N2PC, but no modulations. And the same thing for 5-year-olds, we found the N2PC, but no modulations by our attentional conditions. What is important is in another study, we analyzed whether any of those stable patterns are actually correlating with the educational scores of our kids. And indeed, yes. So for maps that were modulating with multisensory attention, we found that one of those maps or stable EEG patterns actually correlated with scores on literacy measures. Another map was correlating with numeracy scores. For 5-year-olds, we found that it wasn't the multisensory maps. It was one map that was sensitive to visual attention that was now correlating with just the skills of processing numerical information, very important for later mathematical skills. Yeah, so just to summarize this very quickly, what we have learned, well, behaviorally, adult-like visual attentional skills seem to be developed already after 2 years of schooling, while sensitivity of attention to multisensory stimuli seems to require at least 2 years more. So we haven't seen it reliably in the whole group of 9-year-olds, which goes against this this very traditional and intuitive assumption that children are just more distractful adults. Well, it seems that in fact they are not, and while adults are more sensitive to distraction by multisensory information, this is less the case for younger individuals. So in a way, the limited ability to control their attention seems to be protecting them from multisensory distraction. Finally, well-known markers of attention, N2PC, seems to were absent in our whole sample of 5 to 9-year-olds, despite us seeing evidence from behavioral measures, from our multivariate analysis, that those kids can pay attention. And also our multivariate analysis have shown the same patterns as adults And these patterns were already found in 5-year-olds. So that's quite interesting. 9-year-olds, these maps, these stable EEG patterns were already sensitive to audiovisual attention. And then another work that I didn't have the time to show you here, when we just analyzed, when we just did clustering of the data within each age group of the kids, we have also found sensitivity to visual attention. And finally, those EEG-derived attention-sensitive maps and not behavioral markers that are very frequently used as potential biomarkers of learning have correlated with successful educational and skill learning. And so this is something that we're currently pursuing and trying to identify whether these results replicate in a larger sample. And so coming back to our state of the art, presenting a new perspective, and this is my last slide. Okay, so according to this, Johan indeed can have very good attentional skills. We cannot say much about his working memory, but perhaps his very good attentional skills are those that allow him to selectively bind this visual information of the shape of the letter with the sound of that letter. Our little Pierre-François, he may be particularly distracted by audiovisual information. And for him, indeed, those processes may serve as a biomarker of developmental disorder that ADHD is. But also, if the teacher is engaged enough, they can support learning on some existing knowledge. So, for example, Ms. Perronet would say, "Hey, imagine that this is a ladder, right? Ladder, you know. And imagine if the ladder is opening, it's making this sound, this creaking sound, ah." And in this situation, perhaps Pierre could have understood better if we scaffolded with his likely existing knowledge. And finally, our Mary, she also might have very good attentional skills, but rather for visual information, and perhaps the skills of paying attention to audiovisual stimuli may not be as yet well developed. So this is a little bit of a different take than what we currently believe about the cognitive basis of learning. And yeah, I would just like to thank my group, both present and past members. We are in a little, yes, I'm both available with Lausanne and a little place with the School of University of Applied Sciences and Arts in Sion and Sierre. I would also like to thank collaborators in Lausanne, Birkbeck, London, Oxford, and across the whole world, as well as the funders. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Paweł. We ran a little bit over the time. I see there is the question in Q&A box. Would you mind to answer it typing? Because I think we will move to next speaker, not to run over much more. I'm really sorry for this. It was really great talk, really fascinating work. Congrats.